We'll begin our session by restating what the author taught us earlier, namely, that both the circular and the linear aspects of the 12 Partzuphim of Adam Kadmon were formed by the Kav. And in this upcoming illustration, we'll demonstrate how the 12 Partzuphim of Adam Kadmon are organized within the Halal. And although I'm about to enumerate the names of these 12 Partzuphim, nevertheless, I do not intend to discuss the meaning of these names at this stage of the way, but will definitely do so later on. In the meantime, we'll simply enumerate the 12 Partzuphim of Adam Kadmon in their traditional names, in hopes that by doing so we'll become familiar with them and be able to recognize them when we'll need to later on. And I'll take this opportunity to remind us again that in order to allow us to see all the details of the linear Partzuphim, I therefore had to illustrate only a cross-section of the circular Igulim. However, in truth, you should always visualize in the eye of your mind that each and every element of the circular Igulim is actually a complete sphere situated within another sphere, much like the layers of an onion, as the Zohar describes it. And as you see in front of you in the color blue, the very first Partzuf in Adam Kadmon to be formed by the Kav is known as Atik Dechura, literally the male side of Atik, short for Atik Yumin, which is the highest Partzuf of Adam Kadmon, as we'll clarify in much greater detail later on. And as we see, at first the circular Igul of Atik Dechura came into the scene, and then the linear Ve-Yosher aspect of this Partzuf came along as well. The next Partzuf is called Nukvei de Atik, literally the female side of Atik Yumin, as you see here in the color white. First came the circular Igul aspect of this Partzuf, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well, also in the color white. After that, in the color blue, came the circular Igul of the Partzuf known as Arich Dechura, literally the male side of Arich, short for Arich Anpin, which is another Partzuf that we'll be speaking about in great depth later on. And immediately after that, the linear Ve-Yosher aspect of Arich Dechura also appeared, as you can see in the color blue. And I must point out that although I chose to illustrate one particular Partzuf in the color blue while another Partzuf in the color white, that was completely arbitrary in order to help us differentiate between one Partzuf and the next. However, by no means did I mean to suggest that there is any intrinsic connection between these colors and the Partzufim that they happen to represent. Do not forget this point. The next Partzuf to be emanated is called Nukvei de Arich, literally the female side of Arich Anpin, as you see here in the color white. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its corresponding linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After that, in the color blue, came the Partzuf known as Abba. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. And after that, in the color white, came along the Partzuf known as Ima. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. Next in line, in the color blue, came the Partzuf known as Yisrael Saba. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. After Yisrael Saba came the Partzuf known as Tevuna, as we see here in the color white. And again, first came its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Ve-Yosher aspect as well. Next came the Partzuf known as Ze'er Anpin, as we see here in the color blue. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Yosher aspect as well. Following that came the Partzuf known as Le'ah, seen here in the color white. First, its circular Igul aspect, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well. Then came the Partzuf known as Yaakov, in the color blue, and again, first came its circular Igul aspect, and then came its linear Yosher aspect as well. And last of all 12 Partzufim of Adam Kadmon came the Partzuf known as Rachel, represented in our illustration as the circular Igul that was just added in the color white. And although I intentionally left the center of this last circle colored in blue, nevertheless I did so for aesthetic reasons only. But if you look more carefully, you'll notice that the actual circle is still white. And of course, after the circular Igul aspect of Rachel, then came along its linear Yosher aspect as well. And yet again, I'll take another opportunity to remind you that all the circular Igulim are actually complete spheres positioned one within the other like the layers of an onion. However, in order to illustrate what transpired inside of them, it was therefore necessary to illustrate only a cross-section of these circular Igulim. These are the 12 Partzufim of the very first world known as Adam Kadmon, their circular dimension known as the Igulim, as well as their linear dimension known as the Yosher. And the common denominator of all these Partzufim is that they were all created by the light of Rachamim that re-entered the Halal via the Kav. And although in Etz Chaim the Arizal described the Kav as a pipe of sorts, nevertheless, in my opinion, based on what we just learned, we could probably take the allegoric liberty and compare the Kav to the Nile River. After all, the Torah refers to the Nile River as Ha-Yeor HaGadol, literally the great water channel. And although the Nile is certainly a natural river from the days of creation and not a man-made water channel, nevertheless, since the land of Egypt is completely dependent upon all the man-made water channels that draw water from the Nile to irrigate the fields, the Torah therefore refers to the Nile as the great water channel that irrigates all of Mitzrayim, Ha-Yeor HaGadol. Having clarified how the Torah refers to the Nile River, now we can appreciate why I compared the Kav to the Nile. After all, the Kav could also be likened to a great central river in which all the light that enters the Halal from the Ein Sof must travel through before it is able to irrigate all the other channels, i.e., all the circular Igulim and all the linear Yosher aspects of the 12 Partzufim. And it goes without saying that just as without the Nile River there would be no water in Egypt, so too, without the Kav, there would be no light inside the Halal. After being introduced to all of these parables, we should now be able to appreciate what distinguishes between one Partzuf and another. As the Arizal explains that the point in which any particular Partzuf is connected to the Kav as compared to the point in which another Partzuf is connected to the Kav, that is what distinguishes between the greatness of one Partzuf as compared to the other. How so? Once we take to heart that the Kav is the only thing inside the Halal which is connected to the infinite light of the Ein Sof, we should very well expect that at the very top of that Kav, the light of Rachamim should be greater than towards the end of the Kav. If so, then we should also expect that depending on where each and every Partzuf is connected to the Kav, that will determine how much light that particular Partzuf will receive from the Ein Sof via that Kav. And this is why the Arizal often refers to the Kav by the term Kav Hamidah, literally the measuring line or the measuring stick. After all, based on what we just learned, we understand that the kav is what gives measure to all the different Partzuphim that branch out of it, since every single Partzuf branches out at a different point in the kav from any other Partzuf. And the same also holds for each and every world that branches out of the kav, since each world is also connected to the kav at a different point from the other worlds. And according to that rule of thumb, we can now appreciate that since both the circular and the linear aspects of the first Partzuf, known as Atik Dechura, are connected to the kav at a higher point than all the other Partzufim of Adam Kadmon, therefore the light of Rachamim that enters Atik Dechura from the kav is greater than in all the other Partzufim. And on the other side of the coin, since both the circular and the linear aspects of the last Partzuf, known as Rachel, are connected to the kav at a lower point than all the other Partzufim of Adam Kadmon, therefore the light of Rachamim that enters Rachel from the kav is understandably lesser than in all the other Partzufim of Adam Kadmon. And according to the same rule of thumb, we can also describe the difference between one world and the next. How so? Surely we understand now that all the different Partzufim that make up the highest world, known as Adam Kadmon, receive their light of Rachamim from the Ein Sof at a higher point in the kav than all the other worlds, as we'll soon demonstrate in our illustration. And if so, it is therefore very understandable why all the other worlds are much lesser than Adam Kadmon, since after all, these lower worlds receive their light of Rachamim from a much lower point in the kav than Adam Kadmon. And after informing us how the 12 Partzufim of Adam Kadmon were created from the kav, the author continues to teach us how from the same kav the Creator then continued to emanate the 12 Partzufim of the next world called Olam Ha-Atzilut. And in order to properly impress upon you the spiritual location of Olam Ha-Atzilut in comparison to the highest world, which is Adam Kadmon, I intentionally illustrated Olam Ha-Atzilut in the color red, in order to clearly differentiate it from Adam Kadmon, which I have been illustrating all along in the color blue. And we should already note how the entire Olam Ha-Atzilut is positioned within the circular Igulim of Adam Kadmon, and that should already give us some indication of how much greater Adam Kadmon is compared to Olam Ha-Atzilut. The red sapphire that you currently see in front of you is the circular Igul aspect of the greatest Partzuf in Olam Ha-Atzilut, known as Atik Dechura. And let us already clarify from now that the names of the 12 Partzufim of Olam Ha-Atzilut are completely identical to the names of the 12 Partzufim of Adam Kadmon. In fact, all the worlds are comprised of 12 Partzufim who carry the same names as the 12 Partzufim in the other worlds. And not only that, but as we'll be illustrating as we go along, every single Partzuf in every single world has one representation in the circular Igulim realm, as well as another representation in the linear Ve-Yosher realm. And in order to see and appreciate all the different elements that make up Olam Ha-Atzilut, we'll have to proceed with only a cross-section illustration of Olam Ha-Atzilut. And the very first thing that we see inside our cross-section view of Olam Ha-Atzilut is actually the linear Ve-Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon, as you see in the color blue. And although in our previous illustrations we actually differentiated between the 12 different linear Partzufim that make up the Ve-Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon, nevertheless, for our current discussion, it will certainly suffice to group all of Adam Kadmon's linear Partzufim into the one linear cylinder that we see in front of us in the color blue. And of course, it goes without saying that inside of Adam Kadmon's linear aspect is the kav, through which the light of Rachamim enters the Halal from the Ein Sof. And as we see, the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon covers almost the entire extent of the Kav, starting from virtually the very beginning of the Kav, close to the edge of the circular Tzimtzum, and ending at the very end of the Kav, in the center of the Tzimtzum. And of course, this goes hand in hand with the earlier comparison of the linear Yosher elements as one cylinder within another cylinder, much like the layers of a leak. And after the formation of the circular Igul of the first Partzuf in Olam Ha-Atzilut, which is called Atik Dechura, then came its linear Yosher counterpart as well, illustrated in front of us as a red pipe covering the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon in the color blue. And notice how the blue linear Yosher of Adam Kadmon actually protrudes above the height of the linear Yosher of Olam Ha-Atzilut in red. What does the difference in height tell us about these two worlds? This is a clear indication that Adam Kadmon receives its light of Rachamim from a much higher point in the Kav than Olam Ha-Atzilut, inasmuch Adam Kadmon is understandably greater than Olam Ha-Atzilut, thanks of course to its higher connection point to the Kav. Now, let's focus our attention to the lower end of the linear Yosher aspect of Olam Ha-Atzilut, seen here in the color red. And when we do that, we'll notice down there a relatively small blue protrusion that actually belongs to the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon. And as we'll learn in great depth in the near future, this is the small place in which the bottom three worlds, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, are destined to be created. This illustration conforms to the simple understanding of the Arizal's words that describe the linear Yosher aspect of Olam Ha-Atzilut as ending before the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon. And although this picture may actually change slightly according to the deeper understanding of the Arizal's teachings, nevertheless, at this stage of our learning, it is not expected out of us to reconcile all the different subtleties that the Arizal alluded to in his scattered teachings. Nevertheless, I thought I'll mention some of these subtleties in order to quench the thirst of our more studious learners who may have noticed these subtle changes. The next Partzuf to be formed in Olam Ha-Atzilut is a circular Igul aspect of Nukvei de Atik, seen here in the color white. And following that came its linear Yosher aspect as well. Then came the circular Igul aspect of Arich Dechura in the color red, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well. Then came the circular Igul aspect of Nukvei de Arich, as we see in the color white. And then its linear Yosher aspect as well. Next in turn came the Partzuf known as Abba, seen here in the color red. First its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Yosher aspect as well. The next Partzuf to come along is the circular Igul aspect of Ima, in the color white, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well. Then came the circular Igul aspect of Yisrael Sabah, seen here in the color red, immediately followed by its linear Yosher counterpart. Next in line came the circular Igul aspect of Partzuf Tevuna, in the color white. And right after that came its linear Yosher aspect as well. Then came the Partzuf known as Ze'er Anpin, seen here in the color red. First its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Yosher aspect as well. Next came Partzuf Le'ah, in the color white. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Yosher aspect as well. After that, appeared the Partzuf known as Yaakov, seen here in the color red. First, its circular Igul aspect, and then its linear Yosher aspect as well. And last of all the Partzuphim of Olam Ha-Atzilut is the Partzuf known as Rachel, as we see here in the color white. First came its circular Igul aspect, followed by its linear Yosher aspect as well. And this would be the appropriate time and place to bring to your attention a very substantial difference that we find throughout the spiritual worlds between their circular Igulim aspect and their linear Yosher aspect. What important difference am I referring to? We've already pointed out that in the realm of the circular Igulim, each and every lower circle is situated within the greater circular Igul. And this is why we find that all the circular Igulim of Olam Ha-Atzilut are situated within the circular Igulim of Adam Kadmon. As after all, Adam Kadmon is a greater world than Olam Ha-Atzilut. However, when we switch our focus to the linear Yosher aspect of the worlds, we actually find the exact opposite phenomenon. As we see, all of the linear Yosher Partzuphim of Olam Ha-Atzilut in the color red are situated outside of the linear Yosher aspect of Adam Kadmon in the color blue. And that's because the rule of thumb regarding the linear aspect of the worlds is that the higher spiritual element is always situated within the lower spiritual element. Completely the opposite from what we just learned regarding the realm of the circular Igulim. And what's the reason behind this dramatic change? As we already learned, the Arizal stresses that the Tzimtzum happened, so to speak, in a circular fashion. With that in mind, it shouldn't be too hard for us to understand that the circle of the Tzimtzum is necessarily the greatest circle there could be. Since, after all, right above this circle resides none other than the Ein Sof. And certainly the circle of the Tzimtzum is the outermost circle there could be, since it surrounds the entire Halal, where all the future circles are destined to be created. And this is the factor that sets the scale for all the other circular Igulim inside the Halal. Namely, that the greater circular Igul is always more external to the lower grade circular Igul. Because the greater any particular Igul may be, therefore the closer it will be to the Ein Sof that, so to speak, resides on top of the circle of the Tzimtzum. However, when we come to the linear Yosher aspect of the worlds, the scale is set by the Kav and not by the circle of the Tzimtzum. And certainly we understand that the Kav is the greatest linear element inside of the Halal, as we learned earlier that the light of the Ein Sof enters the Halal only through the Kav. If so, then we could probably take the allegoric liberty to suggest that the Kav is, so to speak, the ambassador of the Ein Sof inside the Halal. In other words, the Kav is also an aspect of the Ein Sof inside the Halal. Having said that, we can now appreciate that what determines the scale for both the circular and the linear aspects is always the Ein Sof, be it the Ein Sof himself that resides above the circle of the Tzimtzum, as in the case of the Igulim, or the Kav, who is, so to speak, the ambassador of the Kav inside of the Halal, in the case of the linear Yosher. And this is the reason why the greater linear Yosher elements are always within the lesser linear elements. Since, after all, the further you'll go inside of the linear realm, the closer you'll get to the light of the Ein Sof that flows inside the Kav. and I really hope that all of you managed to comprehend the fine point that I've been trying to clarify here for the last minute or two. Because with that insight in mind, we can begin to understand two seemingly contradictory statements that the Zohar makes with regards to the nature of the Creator. What am I referring to? In one place, the Zohar describes the Creator as being Sovev Kol Almin, literally surrounding all the worlds. On the other hand, the Zohar also describes the Creator as being Bego Kol Almin, literally inside all the worlds. But how do we reconcile these two contradictory statements? After all, you would think that the one surrounding is not the one inside, and conversely, that the one inside is not the one that's surrounding. However, based on what we just clarified together, we should be able to appreciate that when the Zohar referred to the Creator as being Sovev Kol Almin, i.e. surrounding all the worlds, it was actually referring to the Ein Sof himself that surrounds the Halal on the outside. However, the other phrase that the Zohar made regarding the Creator as being Bego Kol Almin, i.e. inside of all the worlds, that was actually referring to the aspect of the Ein Sof that enters the Halal via the Kav, which we earlier on described as, so to speak, the ambassador of the Ein Sof inside the Halal. If so, then everything makes sense now, as God is truly everywhere, inside and outside of the Tzimtzum.